10% in August. So a lot of the 10.5% growth was in these big one-time payments. And when I looked through the top taxpayers, there were several large companies that had never paid to us before. And when you read what they did, really sounded like large construction projects that they were selling, storm systems, drainage systems, decking systems, joists, to large construction projects. And so that's good. It's real revenue, but it's not revenue you necessarily can count on going forward, and not necessarily reflective of consistent business that our stores will see going forward. So I did a little academic exercise in my head, and I said, well, what if the amount of variable sales tax payment we got this year didn't grow by 85%, but it grew by sort of what I'm going to call a neutral rate. And I chose for my neutral rate the rate of inflation, or 8.3%. What if it only grew by that? So it didn't really affect the numbers a whole lot either way. And if our variable payments had grown at that neutral rate, 8.3%, then sales tax to the city in August would not have grown by 10.5%. It would have grown by 7.2%. So in my mind, that's sort of reflective of the consistent taxpayers and sort of what's going on in the business community in Aurora. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's helpful. But to me, that helps to explain why we saw such a large number. And again, that it's good in terms of revenue. I think if you want to look at what it means in terms of what our businesses are doing, it's not quite as positive as the 10.5% would lead you to believe.
Makes sense. Thanks for that analysis. That's helpful. Council Member Zvonek, any questions?
I don't have any. No, thanks.
All right. Thank you. And just want to make sure it does not look like Councilmember Murillo.
Still on. She did get on.
Oh, she was on. Okay. Councilmember Murillo, do you have any questions on that?
No. Yeah, I think I logged in just right at 1. Did we start the presentation early or?
No, it was 1 o'clock when we started.
Okay.
You might have just been a couple seconds late.
Okay, sorry. I didn't. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't have any.
No, we just have a really crowded agenda, so I just wanted to get started on it.
That's fine. No questions here.
All right. Appreciate that. Thanks, Bill, for your presentation.
Thank you, Council. I appreciate it.
All right. Next up, Councilmember Drinsky, Occupational Privilege Tax Repeal.
And I don't see her on. I've forwarded the invite again. I think she was invited initially. So I don't know if you want to go to the next item and we'll see what happens here.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's go to the next item. And if she doesn't make it on, we can hear it in October. Next up, Councilmember Marcano, Ward Realignment Recommendation Deadline. Yep, I see Councilmember Marcano.
And he's on mute, Councilmember Marcano. Now I saw him on screen just a little bit ago. Okay.
Yeah, let's
let me unmute him, see if I can do that.
Looks like he's on, yeah, not on mute right now.
I muted him. Councilmember Marcano, can you address your item?
Let's go to the next item, and then hopefully we can kind of bump him down one spot, assuming we can get the audio figured out. Julie Heckman, update on e-discovery in courts.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I'm Julie Heckman, Deputy City Attorney, and the City Manager had asked our office to give the committee an update on the ongoing technology analysis for e-discovery. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands it really is the City Attorney's Office case management system to help us transition from the fully paper file status that we're working in currently to an electronic case management system. And then part of that would be the ability to give e-discovery out electronically rather than in the fully paper manner that we're doing now. And that discovery would be for any defendant that is here in the municipal court, whether they are pro se representing themselves, or whether they have a private defense counsel or a public defender's office. So now we are giving full paper discovery, and for all of the body worn camera and the videos and the pictures, those things are all downloaded to disk and then given out that way. So just as an update for that information, what I did was try to give the committee, and I know that Chair, you were on public safety last year, but this issue of e-discovery and the case management system came before public safety last year at the end of one of the meetings, October 14th of 2021. At that time, the interim court administrator was Mike Ritter, and so he had gone forward and asked for 2 additional FTEs to help with getting that case management system, our internal city attorney's office work, and the e-discovery software tool completed. And so that's how it started. So I provided those notes, meeting minutes for you, as well as Chair Gruber at the time of public safety had asked, and the committee asked for that to come back the next meeting, which was November 9th, to have a further discussion about what was needed specifically for the case management and e-discovery, and also based upon some questions that had been asked about how the process was going in court IT, asked for city IT to also be present and kind of talk about how that could be analyzed as far as a buy versus build for this sort of software. So that is kind of the background on how the issue started with public safety. And then in coming to your committee, we were asked to kind of just lay that out and see where we are today. So again, once City Council has hired the new court administrator, Candace Atkinson, we've had many conversations that had continued, that had happened before with presiding Judge Day and Doug Wilson from the Public Defender's Office. Court IT and City IT has always been involved in looking at what is best to kind of move things along electronically for the courts. And for years, that discussion has been going on, and we've all agreed that the City Attorney's Office certainly needs to be the beginning of that. We need to get our case management into an electronic system, then we can go to the e-discovery, giving out discovery electronically, and then eventually the court could start accepting all filings electronically, because as you know, now that's all done by paper. So that had always been the plan of how things would be rolled out. We had continued to have discussions after that last public safety meeting. What had been promised or confirmed by, at the time, the interim court administrator was that with getting those 2 FTEs, they could have all of that work completed by first quarter of this year, 22. So first quarter came, and despite we had many meetings before that, we were not in a position to have that electronic workflow. As of today, we are still not, but once Candace Atkinson came on board, we had continuing conversations, and we have now gone back to CDAC, who we had talked with earlier before all of that background, about looking at the e-discovery tool that they have, and that it is a statewide system for all the prosecutors in the state system, which is very unique to Colorado. But that's something that in about 2014, the legislature looked at how different places were doing discovery and charging different things. And I think that at the time, the public defender at the state level had done a large budget request asking for an additional 2.2 million. So the legislature looked at how we do this better. And so they did put legislation in the next year, and Colorado has gone to doing e-discovery all the same through the district attorney's offices. So that's one thing that we had looked at years ago, because our police department, APD records, the crime lab with body cams, and also E911 with all of the dispatch tapes, they all package all of the evidence now and send that off to the state, the CDAC system. So originally, I had asked the question, if that's being done already, would it be helpful or consistent if all of the City of Aurora agencies would package things the same way they do, and we could have a system that was very similar or mirrored the CDAC system. So that's why we originally had started talking with them. So we've reinitiated those conversations about whether or not the municipality could get into that kind of system. So that's one option, and we have talked with them. They've given us a very general quote of what they think it would take to, look at their system and design it, redesign it, or change it a little bit to make it work for our court system, because we don't have data sharing right now between the courts. So we would be needing all of our court dates and those things to be implemented into that system. So right now we have a general quote on what that would cost. There are some other municipalities that we have talked with that also are trying to get electronic and looking at things, and they may be interested. If they were interested in getting onto that CDAC system, that certainly would change the startup costs for us. So we're having those continued conversations. And at the same time, we have also looked at kind of an outside vendor. There are several outside vendors that do prosecution type case management systems. Some of them do include e-discovery components. So those are the ones that we were looking at. We have had one of those come out that we know works very closely with Axon, who does our body worn camera. So that assimilation would be good. We've had them come out and do a presentation that city IT, court IT, and all of the folks over here have been involved in. So we're looking at different types of options. But the need to get this implemented, certainly from the city attorney's office perspective, is way past due. Just the inefficiencies that are created and the time that's spent in the labor intensive utilization of these files, where multiple people in the office need to be working with the file at the same time, and with one paper file, that can't be done. So all of the different things that need to be done have to be done one at a time. And it just creates a lot of inefficiencies, and takes longer for us to get the evidence from APD to us, to get it then prepared and ready to give out to Discovery, and then getting that completed. So I think that is I believe the update that you were looking for, but happy to answer any questions.
Appreciate that update, Julie. And I think the only comment that I have, and I had said this last year in public safety, is my preference is to go with kind of a standard software, not creating our own. And it sounds like we're looking into some options like that. And those are my concerns because of, or I have that concern because of, when you have somebody who designs a program in-house, that person leaves, you just create some issues there. And so for support purposes, ongoing support purposes, I always prefer to use something standard. And I can't imagine that Aurora is that unique, that there isn't a software out there that won't meet our needs. So that's just kind of my thought or my input. But again, really appreciate the update. Obviously, it's a project that's been going on for a while, and certainly something that we need to get implemented. So Council Member Murillo, any questions or comments?
None for me. Thanks for the update.
Councilmember Zvonek.
No, I would echo what you just said. I think that to the extent that we can find a product that not only because for the reasons you pointed out, but if there's some collaboration or any sort of data that can be shared across different jurisdictions, having that software would seem to make a lot of sense. I also just hope that this is a part of the broader conversation that we're continuing to have with IT in general, and moving toward a capability model for the entire city. I think having, and this isn't just related to courts or even prosecution, but just generally across every department. I think that having a standalone IT department doesn't make a lot of sense. I think having people embedded there, but ultimately coming back to one shared capability makes a lot more sense. I hope we integrate this conversation into that broader one.
Appreciate that. Thanks again, Julie.
Thank you.
All right, we will go back to item 4A, Councilmember Drinsky, occupational privilege tax repeal.
Yes, thank you. And sorry, I was having a hard time getting on my computer. So this occupational privilege tax repeal it's pretty straight up and it's pretty simple. We have an occupational privilege tax in Aurora. We are one of only 5 cities in the state that have this occupational privilege tax. Sheridan has it, Greenwood Village has it, Glendale has it, and Denver has it. I asked to get some more information about where it came from, how it came into existence. Trevor Vaughn told me that he knew that this came about to be sometime in the 80s in Aurora, and he felt like it was probably implemented at that time as an additional revenue generator. And I think that it's time that we, take this off of the backs of small businesses as well as workers in Aurora. This tax specifically targets every business in Aurora has to pay $2 per employee on paychecks, matched by every worker in Aurora has to pay the same tax, $2 per paycheck once a month. And I just think that this is an additional unnecessary burdensome tax that we should get rid of. The fiscal note on this, when I had asked, the best information that I had been given when I was on CABC last year was that it was roughly $5 to $6 million is what this accounts for. And because we had a surplus in our budget, I see no reason why I would need to figure out what I'm going to cut out of the budget to make this tax cut work. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that introduction. Terry, anything from staff?
Yes, I have Jeff Edwards who can do a quick overview. He has a presentation if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Jeff, do you need the ability to share?
Nope, thank you, Terry. I have it. It'll be just a quick presentation. Councilmember Drinsky did a really good job of actually going through and going over the majority of it. So the only thing that I would add, she's right. Trevor did have that right. It was from the 1986 is when it was implemented. There are a couple of exemptions which aren't super important. The only thing that is kind of different with this repeal is that it's not a very easy thing to re-implement. It would have to go back through the voters in order for it to be reinstituted. Whereas if we have a sales or use tax exemption, we can easily repeal that exemption without having to go through the voters. These are the different jurisdictions that Councilmember Drinsky already addressed. They range from $2 is the lowest, and then $5.75 for Denver is the highest amount. And then the fiscal impact, she was right. It's about 5.9 million for 2023 is what the budgeted revenues are for. So with that 5.9, if we take out some of those items that we wouldn't be able to cut, this would come down to about a 5% cut for specific areas. So for example, if we took out police, fire, 911 courts, and some transfers and other mandates, it leaves about 117 million, which is predominantly people and supplies that would need to be cut from the 2023 budget. Also, some of these revenues are used by the Aurora Urban Renewal Authority as far as for incentive and development projects. And that's about all I have. I'd be glad to answer questions if there's any.
So I actually have a question because I asked thoroughly about this when I was on the CABC, and I asked where these funds go, and I was told by Greg Hayes that all of these funds go into the general fund. That's really concerning to me if the urban renewal, if AURA is using some of these funds, because just last night I was told that none of those funds come out of the general fund, specifically regarding our parking lot structure.
And I would address that, council member. Basically, when we have a TIF area, any of the revenues that are generated from the specific project, including OPT, would go back to the project. So I think on Jeff's slides, it's just acknowledging that the revenue that's generated from specific projects are then shared back as a part of incentive agreements that were approved by previous city councils. So it would definitely change the revenue flow to some of those projects. And I also have Greg online to answer any budgetary related questions. I know from a $6 million, almost $6 million budget perspective, it does have some larger impacts. And maybe Greg, you can put it a little bit into perspective from a standpoint of what that reduction would mean.
I sure can. Thank you very much. Greg Hayes, budget guy. If you're looking at $5.9 million, it's the equivalent of about 80 people. We do have a balanced budget for 2023, and if you take $6 million out, it would not be balanced. We would have to go find that money from somewhere. It is a significant amount of money. It's larger than 6 different council or 6 different budgets, general fund budgets. Rural Water City Council, Communications, General Management, HR, Planning, their entire budgets are actually less than that. And what's more, 2024 is actually not, it's close to being on. We don't need to have a balanced budget for the future, but taking on another $6 million of ongoing funds would make that harder for the 2024 budget as well.
All right, thank you, Greg and Jeff. Councilmember Murillo, questions or comments for either staff or the sponsor?
Thanks, Councilmember Gardner. I think a few comments, just that, yeah, I think that coming into the conversation and just saying that, oh, we have a surplus, and therefore I don't really need to look for kind of the accompanying piece of where this revenue, ongoing revenue would come from, is concerning to me. To the staff's comments around, this does make it more challenging to balance our budget in the future. There will be budget implications. So I think that was the biggest concern for me, and I would like a better understanding of where the city management would take those ongoing funds, because it's not just funds that would be taken out of this year's budget or whenever this comes into effect, but kind of ongoing. So I think that's just my biggest comment and request before this moves forward on my end.
Member Zvonek, questions or comments?
I would just say we haven't set a 2023 budget as far as I know. We're going to do that at the budget workshop, and I think that'll give us plenty of opportunity to identify, what reductions are we need to make in order to make this happen. But I think in terms of sending a signal that, we want to continue to be the most business-friendly city in the state, or want to be the most business-friendly city in the state, getting rid of a tax to privilege tax of working in Aurora. We have to, I think, try to change our mental model and recognize that it's actually a privilege for us to have employees here, and it's not a privilege for them to work here. And I think this is one of the ways we can do that.
Councilmember Gardner, it looks like City Manager Twombly has his hand raised.
Jim, are you there?
Yes, and I just wanted to check with Jeff. It seems like I saw in the original ordinance that fire, police, and road maintenance were cited as reasons for instituting this tax in the first place. The funds weren't dedicated for those purposes, but I think those were cited as reasons why the council voted to approve that tax. Jeff, do you have any information on that?
Correct. Thanks. City Manager Jim Twombly, appreciate that question. That is correct. This was essentially for a way for us to distribute the tax burden for the city to those that are coming into the city to work. And it pointed out that it was for police, fire, road maintenance, those types of costs, and other municipal services.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Gardner.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I asked repeatedly on CABC if these funds were dedicated for anything in particular. And I was told numerous times, no, They're not earmarked for anything. They just go into the general fund, and that's where they are at, is in the general fund. And as Councilmember Zvonek just said, to the fact that we have a tax on businesses and workers in the city of Aurora, stating that it's their privilege to do business in this city or to be a worker in this city. I can't believe this has never been brought up before, but I think that we absolutely need to change our mindset on that and realize that it is actually the city's privilege. It is our privilege for businesses to come here and for workers to want to work in Aurora. And also, as Councilmember Zvonek just pointed out, the budget is not set. And that's exactly what we are going to go to, the budget committee meeting to do. And the fact that we have any additional tax on people in Aurora, I think that those should be eliminated. And just as other taxes, on menstrual products and on diapers in this city have been eliminated, I look at this tax repeal as actually a more equitable tax cut, because it will be for anybody, regardless of gender, regardless of race. I mean, if you work in Aurora or you have a business in Aurora, this tax is on you, and this will be a tax savings to all those who wish to do business here and work here.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Councilmember Gardner.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the fact that we're not acknowledging that for months, staff has, put together our budget, essentially line item by line item. We've had public presentations at town halls. We've had specific budget presentations. So like suddenly to say that like we're not essentially almost at the end, and that we don't have a budget. Sure, it's not yet confirmed, but let's be clear that this would be a last minute change that hasn't been incorporated into this current budget as it's been written. So I just want to be very clear that when we say it's not yet been finalized, that's because we haven't yet made the final approval, but a last minute change is what this would be. So I just want to be very clear that that's where we're at in the budget process for this year.
Councilmember Gardner, I'd like to respond to that.
Please go ahead.
So the budget is created every single year. I mean, it's created every single year. So I'm not sure there's really a good time or a bad time to bring forward, a tax cut. But I had some things that I needed to look into. Obviously, I, wanted to come to this committee. It would be my prerogative to have brought this straight to a council meeting and to rush, this process. But as I heard from my colleagues that don't always agree with me on much of anything, they would prefer me to follow the standard process that we have in place. So I went about it that way this time. And I'm not sure that there's ever that you can consider any kind of tax cut on our citizens and our businesses to be something that's last minute. I find it to be something that's necessary.
All right. Thanks everybody for comments and feedback. Councilmember Murillo, would you like this to move forward?
Not at this time. We were just talking about understanding fiscal notes and larger impacts last night, and for it to be at the 11th hour, I don't think, it's not something that I would prefer, but if, obviously we'll talk about it if the committee approves it going forward. But like I said, I just wanted to be very clear on the rhetoric and the shaping of the conversation. So that's why I made my comments.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, I think now is the perfect time to move it forward, as the elected officials who were elected by the people of Aurora to set the budget. We'll be having a conversation about the budget for next year. It means we'll have to do some work, but that's okay because that's what we were elected to do.
All right, and I'm fine with it moving forward as well. All right, up next, Councilmember Marcano, ward realignment recommendation deadline.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Gardner and committee members. So the proposal before y'all is pretty straightforward. It does two things. The first is it sets a deadline of no later than October 15th for rewarding recommendations to be before council. And then the second is it just basically really preserves the existing timeline that we have for the rewarding process to begin. Just in case the timing of elections ever changes into the future. The reason I brought this forward was because in 2019, if you all remember, those of you who ran then, rewarding didn't actually finish until I think it was near the summer of the election year, which was pretty darn late. And I just want to make sure that we are ensuring that that doesn't happen going forward. I know that this rewarding cycle, I think we're on track to basically be done by mid-October, which is great. I just want to make sure that that's not left to chance in the future and that it becomes a matter of policy moving forward.
All right, thank you. Council Member Zvonek, any questions or comments?
No, I think that makes sense. I know that earlier, Councilmember Marcano, when we were having these discussions at the beginning of the year, there was some concern because the initial timeline, I think it didn't have us finishing until into next year. This committee, we decided to do that. So I think creating some sort of, just guidelines going forward that keeps us on track is appropriate, and I would support that moving forward.
Councilmember Murillo.
I don't have any questions. Similar to the comments just made, we intentionally moved it up so that there was less ambiguity later into next year. So I think this is in line with the actions that we've taken on this committee this year. So I support moving it forward.
All right, yeah, and as both the other council members pointed out, we intentionally changed the original schedule that was presented to us to avoid this very problem where the maps wouldn't have been finalized until late spring, early summer next year for folks running, which just could create some confusion. So I am okay with it moving forward as well. Thank you for the presentation.
Great, thank you.
Let's see, so we did 4C. Next up, Chad Fitzsimmons, Business Improvement District, new board member appointment.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is just the process that we need to go through whenever a business improvement district has a new elector. So it's a relatively small board. They only have 5 seats. They have a small pool of businesses to pull from since it's such a small bid. So this is this newest recommendation from their existing board members is just to expand their existing board. And the nominee is extremely interested in serving and contributing to the businesses on that block.
All right, appreciate that. Councilmember Murillo, comments or questions?
None here.
Councilmember Zvonek?
Sure.
All right, and I assume both of you are okay with it moving forward?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
Next up, Katie, 2023 ward redistricting review.
Yes, this is just to come back for the MNF Policy Committee to finalize the decision on which scenario they would like to move forward to council. So we don't have any new information. This was just the second meeting to allow additional time for the commission members to review the maps.
Yeah, and can you remind me which was the map that was, I guess, recommended or put forward by the election commission?
Scenario 5.
Scenario 5, okay. Councilmember Zvonek, any thoughts, comments, questions?
I guess my one question, maybe, Katie, is that can we have more than one from our committee go forward to the full council, or are you just looking for one?
There's nothing that states you can't move forward more than one recommendation. So I think it would be up to this commission on how you'd like to do that.
I guess my suggestion would be to have these go forward to the full council, to have a conversation with more of our colleagues about these scenarios. and have maybe a presentation from the election commission at a study session. Because I think that's what the next step is, right? We come to a study session.
Yes.
So have it come to that study session and a presentation as to why the election commission chose that map, and then also lay out the other scenarios. Because I can imagine that some of our colleagues might ask, why we chose this one, why the election commission chose that one, and what were the other scenarios, so that they could have eyes on them too. So that's my recommendation for moving it forward.
Councilmember Murillo?
Yeah, something similar on my end. I would prefer to not narrow it down at this point, since this impacts the full council, and have the broader discussion at a study session where we can all talk about it, all the options.
Okay, well, it sounds like that's what the will of the committee is. So we will, I guess, Katie, is that going to be the next available study session? Is that what our schedule was?
It's actually the second study session in October. So
Okay.
it's not the one on this Monday, but the next one.
The next one, yeah. Okay, sounds good. Well, we will get a presentation at the second study session in October. And Katie, thank you. And I don't know if Daniel's on the phone, but thank you both for all your work this year with our committee and the presentations and all that. Really appreciate you guys working through the process.
Okay, thank you. And we'll work with the election commission to get them on the study session for the last study session in October.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Next up, Teresa Sedmak, annual review of investment policy.
Good afternoon. Get my computer to work here. This is more of an information item than anything else. The investment policy that we have for the city was modified last year and brought up to date. And it does require that we review the policy at least every other year. In practice, we're continually looking at the investment policy, and in order that we can incorporate any changes in state statute or other required changes. We did go through it this year. The review did not find much that needed to be changed. We made two non-substantive changes in that we defined the nationally recognized statistical rating organizations as Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. So just added a definition of what those are. And then we reformatted the section related to general obligation bonds and revenue bonds, just to make it more clear. It was just not very clear before. The revisions were presented to the Investment Advisory Committee at its meeting on August 4th. And council has advised that due to the non-substantive matter of these changes, that we don't need any council action in its regard. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Murillo, questions or comments?
I do not have any questions.
Councilmember Zvonek?
No.
All right, thank you for the presentation, Teresa.
Sure.
Looks like you are up next for proposed modifications to moral obs policy and review of existing moral obs.
Yes, so this item includes both the proposed revisions to the policy and a review of existing moral obligations. I should note that when this moves, if it moves forward to study session and council, it won't have the review of the existing moral obligations. That's something that we present to MNF, and it's not required to go to council unless it's requested specifically. So I'm going to begin with the two existing transactions, which include moral support from the city, and those are the Hyatt Conference Center parking garage, which you're aware of. And there's also a Bioscience 3 building at Fitzsimmons that we provide support for. At last evening's meeting, council approved the continuance of the moral obligation support on the Hyatt Conference Center and parking garage as part of its refinancing. And that's going to close next week. Just want to let you know that because that was approved last night, we were able to lock the rate today based on a 3.81% rate on the 10-year U.S. Treasury. The rate on the new loan was locked at 4.06%. And I just note that when I originally wrote the commentary for this item about 2 weeks ago, the Treasury was at about a 3.41. So in just a couple of weeks, it's gone up by 40 basis points, and it's anticipated to go further. So that's why we thought it important to move forward with that transaction as soon as possible. So the moral support on this transaction takes the form of a debt service reserve. It will be equal to 1 year's debt service on the loan, and that's going to be about $1.7 million. And what the moral obligation says is that should the debt service reserve be depleted, it's to be replenished, and that's where it would have to go to council for an appropriation if there weren't funds available. AURA has been providing support to this transaction in the form of capital advances from other TIF revenues generated within the Fitzsimmons urban renewal area. So no draw has been made on the debt service reserve. That's partially due to the fact that that could be a reportable event to investor services, and it may have negative connotations. So we've been choosing to make capital advances instead. We anticipate the need to continue that financial support. We don't anticipate it this year. We don't anticipate it next year, but 2024 and further along, we may have to give additional support. So that is where we are with the Hyatt Conference Center and parking garage. The Bioscience 3 also has moral obligation support, and that's also in the form of a debt service reserve of about $2.5 million. The same stipulation applies that if that's depleted, it needs to be replenished. So that building is doing okay. It was completed in 2020. The majority of the space has been leased out. They do have about 30,000 square feet, or about approximately 25% of the total square footage that has yet to be leased. They're looking at a possible tenant for that, but they're holding off. That tenant is holding off on a decision till first quarter of 2023 in light of the economic uncertainty that's out there right now. But they do have other potential tenants in the pipeline. So that moral obligation terminates in December 2024. And the Fitzsimmons Redevelopment Authority has the adequate liquidity to satisfy its debt service obligations and doesn't foresee a draw on the debt service reserve, but will continue to monitor the situation and report back to MNF. As far as the revisions go, last year, Councilmember Gruber requested a review of the moral obligation policy in order to strengthen it. So to that end, I've been working with bond counsel to do a thorough review and recommend a number of modifications. Most of them are stylistic in nature, but we did make some notable changes. Of import is the change in the wording from moral obligation pledge to moral obligation support, because we thought that the word pledge implies a binding financial obligation and a pledge of collateral, and neither of those is the case when we grant moral obligation support. So that's an important change, I think. We also included with the policy a summary of what a moral obligation is. That was not included in the prior policy, or it was given as an attachment to City Council. The new policy explicitly prohibits substantive changes in the financing, in the proposed financing subsequent to its presentation to MNF, unless the authorizing documents allow that. So in other words, once we present a situation where moral support is offered, the deal can't change. They can't change the business terms of the loan or the support unless it's specifically allowed in the documents. And we also strengthened the evaluation criteria so that now includes that we would need to present the timing and frequency related to the moral obligation. In other words, would it be a one-time event, or is it intended to be available over multiple time periods? And we also include the evaluation criteria, the likelihood of repayment of the moral obligation over time. So those are the changes we proposed. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have in this regard. The full policy, and I thought it was going to be a red line, so it's not a red line, but I can provide one if you want. It's included in your packet. And we ask if you will support forwarding the moral obligation policy to full council for approval.
All right, thank you for the presentation. And yeah, I agree on the changes that were made. I think just clarifying some things, tightening up some language, and then even just having a description of what more obligations are for members of the public or people who are less familiar. I think all those changes are good. So I would support moving it forward. Councilmember Murillo, any questions or comments? And then do you support moving forward as well?
Yeah, I was just going to ask for the red line version, if you don't mind. And I do support adding more clarity and like practical usefulness for the policy. So I do support moving it forward.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zvonek.
No questions, and I do support moving it forward.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like you're up one more time.
One more item, and that is just to give, it's informational only, and it's to give you a recap of the 2022 COPS transaction that we recently closed on. So we went to market with those COPS on August 24th. We had a par amount of $31.9 million to offer to investors, and we actually got orders for over $102 million. So we were 3.2% oversubscribed, meaning the demand was higher than supply, which allowed us to go back and reprice a number of those maturities for interest rate reductions. So we had a successful pricing. Some of the longer term maturities were actually repriced with a higher yield because the demand in certain years on the longer end was a little bit weak. So the all-in interest cost, which includes underwriting and cost of issuance on that deal, came in at 3.685. Again, we got it. Interest rates are rising so quickly. I'm glad we got that done when we did. The closing on the COPS occurred September 7th. They were sold by RBC and Stifel, and they were actually packaged with a rating of AA1 from Moody's. And that's the highest rating that that's afforded to an appropriation credit. So that's part of the reason that it was met with so much demand. Like I said last night, we have great reception from investors because of our strong ratings, and it serves us well. So happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Zvonek, any questions?
No questions. That's great news. Happy to hear that we were able to lock in the lower rate and move this forward. I know this is ultimately going towards much needed road maintenance repair. So just happy to hear that we're moving forward and saving the city taxpayers a little bit of money along the way.
Thank you.
Councilmember Murillo.
Nothing on my end.
All right. Thank you for the presentations, Teresa.
Thank you.
All right, up next, the 2023 bid operating plans and budgets. It's items 5A through 5J. I assume we can present those kind of as one.
Yes, Carol Toth will present those.
Great. Hi, Carol.
Hello. Thank you, Councilmember Gardner. Today, we are here to look at 10 business districts that have been organized within the city and looking at their 2023 operating plans and budgets. The state statute does require that each business improvement district that's organized within a municipality file their upcoming annual budget with the city clerk for review by city council. And city council must review and either approve or disapprove the budget by December the 5th. So we do kind of have a shorter time frame here. So we've kind of got this moving along at a fast pace. If the committee today does approve the 2023 operating plans and budgets and their respective resolutions, they will go forward to City Council study session on October the 17th. With us today, we do have Chad Argentar and Jennifer Orozco, the project managers from Planning and Development Services, as well as several members from the business improvement districts that are available to answer any questions that you might have about any of the plans that are listed out, the 10 districts. So we could either give a brief overview of each of those, or if you have specific questions about specific bids, we can get those answered for you as well.
Okay. I think since they were included in the backup, we don't need individual presentations, but you can give council members an opportunity to answer or to ask questions, I should say. So Councilmember Murillo, any questions on 5A through 5J?
No.
Councilmember Zvonek?
I don't have any.
All right. And are you both okay with moving that forward? These forward?
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right. These will move forward. Thank you for the presentation. And then next up, same kind of presentation for 6A through 6F. We'll present those at with one, and then can vote on those as well. So Andrew, 2023 GID operating plan and budgets.
Yeah, good afternoon. As we said, these are the ordinances to approve the operating plans for the GIDs within the city of Aurora. Generally, they authorize a mill levy to collect a property tax within the district to pay debt service for certain capital improvements that the districts had elected to improve, with the exception of the Aurora Conference Center that uses a direct funding model to help pay for improvements up. It's in the area near the Gaylord. So yeah, similar thing. If you have any, does the committee have any questions for us, or would you like any additional information on these?
Councilmember Zvonek, any questions?
No.
Councilmember Murillo?
No questions for me.
And are you both okay with moving these forward?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
All right. That looks like our last item. So our next meeting is scheduled for October 25th at 1 p.m. Unless I hear from anyone that won't work, we'll plan on that being our next meeting. And I think with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.